Dorian stood in the long check-in line at the airport, looking at the beautiful profile of his charming wife Salome. She was one of those rare people whose profile was even more beautiful than the front view. He not only loved her, he adored her. He looked for her for a long time, but she was worth every second of waiting. He couldn't help but smile at the sight of her boyish hairstyle, cute button nose, and chiseled lips. "What's so funny, Dor?" Salome asked him with a soft smile without turning her head. "It's okay, Sal, you're just amazing," he said proudly, looking at her long, muscular legs, which were beautifully emphasized by her yoga pants. Their relationship had its ups and downs. Dorian was a difficult person. He was a man of principles. Not many people could live up to his high moral standards. Sal was the only such woman. She was a complicated person herself, an uncompromising vegan, a minimalist, an environmental fanatic, and a shelter volunteer. It would be fair to say that if they had not met each other, they would probably have remained single for a very long time. They were introduced 2 years ago by a mutual friend, Betty. Sal and Betty have worked in the legal department of a large advertising agency for the past 10 years. Betty first dated Dorian. The spark between them ignited instantly, but their opposing worldviews and Dorian's complete unwillingness to compromise made the continuation of their relationship almost impossible. However, they ultimately remained good friends. It wasn't difficult for Betty to introduce him to her best friend Sal. They weren't a perfect couple. Dorian was just a vegetarian, not a vegan. He belonged to the right camp, and she belonged to the left. He loved dogs, and she loved cats. His Belgian shepherd didn't like her ginger cat. He preferred to spend time alone with her, while she preferred communication, parties, and parties. However, the commonality between them overcame their differences, and love blossomed in the blink of an eye. 10 months after their first date, they got married. In 2 weeks, they will celebrate their first wedding anniversary. Sal stopped using birth control a month ago. They were ready to have children. Dorian worked as a department manager for a large security company, a job given to him by one of his former army commanders. His service was shrouded in secrecy. Whatever he did for his country, he did it very well. He left the service at 27 after suffering too many losses. Despite this, his commanders and contacts were happy to help ease his transition to civilian life. However, he was occasionally called up for active reserve duty. This usually happens 3 or 4 times a year unexpectedly, but not for long. Luckily for him, it usually only lasted a few days. His friends and family knew not to ask any questions. Sal's upcoming trip was related to her work and was a very joyful event. Once a year, her company vacation for 4 days and 3 nights at an all-inclusive resort, employees and spouses. In addition to 24-hour free alcohol, there were day and night parties with DJ, stand-up shows, small island tours, and special attractions. The company's management spared no expense. Dorian smiled adoringly at Sal when his phone rang. His smile disappeared when he noticed the ID number on the screen. "Do not answer," Sal screamed hysterically. He scrunched his face in agony and shook his head, but pressed the phone to his ear. Yes, I understand. I'm already on the road." "No," said Sal. "I'm so sorry," Dor whispered honestly. "You know I have to go, but hey, have fun for both of us, okay?" Sal nodded, clearly depressed. He kissed her quickly, turned and left the terminal. Sal followed him with a longing gaze when she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. It was Betty. "You and I will have the best time of our lives," she promised her best friend. "From now on, you're stuck with me." The flight and drive to the resort were relatively short, and check-in went smoothly. Luckily, Betty and her hotel roommate, Lisa, had a room not too far from Sal's. Sal's breath caught when she saw the breathtaking deep blue bay, perfectly visible from the balcony of her room. The resort's rooms were scattered in rows on the hillside that sloped down to the beach. This is where all the restaurants, bars, clubs, and sports facilities were located. Fortunately for Betty and Sal, their row was not located high on the hill. Otherwise, the climb back up the stairs could be tedious. After a quick shower and change of clothes, Sal met up with her friends, and they went down to the dining room to have lunch. Then they skipped to the bar. They were very excited and in high spirits when they returned to Betty and Lisa's room. Oscar and Ben, the young copywriters who lived in the next room, entered uninvited with mischievous smiles. Oscar pulled out a huge joint and asked if they wanted to celebrate. The girls giggled and nodded in delight. "Where did you get this from?" Betty asked in surprise. "The employee who brought us our luggage asked if we needed anything else." Oscar replied smugly, "This is the mood for the whole time here." Ben set the mobile speaker on the coffee table and set up his phone's Bluetooth while Oscar lit a joint. He took a deep breath and then passed it to Sal. Melodious, techno began to emanate from the speaker as Sal exhaled. A pleasant dizziness overtook her almost immediately. A forbidden thought occurred to her. If Dor were here with me, I would not be sitting in this room with my friends enjoying the beautiful grass. Dor drew the line at alcohol and was quite strict about it. He hated feeling like he was out of control. I wish he would relax a little, Sal thought. She passed the joint to Betty, nodding approvingly that it was good stuff. Soon they were all chatting uncontrollably, giggling and laughing. Well, almost everyone. While most people become talkative after smoking, Sal tended to withdraw into herself. Adding alcohol to the mix only made her quieter and more withdrawn. She sank into a chair with her eyes half closed, slowly shaking her head and shoulders, enjoying the music and the pleasant massage sensation that ran through her entire body. Ben went to his room and returned with bottles of vodka, lemon juice, and disposable cups that he had bought earlier at duty free. Betty made sure Sal got her drink in a glass. Sal didn't accept any plastic. After toasting, they began to slowly dance to the soothing music in the room. Their holiday started off right. Later that evening, a group of 5 people sat around a communal table for dinner. Sal and Oscar were engrossed in each other and couldn't stop exchanging flirtatious glances and smiles. When this continued at the bar, Betty felt like they had lost interest in the rest of the group. Sal was in her room getting ready for the beach party when Betty suddenly walked in. "Care to tell me exactly what's going on between you two?" Betty asked without beating around the bush. "Nothing, actually," Sal answered with some embarrassment. "It's just nice to get a little attention from men for a change. No one dares even look at me when Dora is around. He scares the hell out of them just by existing." "Nothing," Betty asked skeptically. "I don't mean to sound nasty," Sal said, "but I'm kind of glad Dora isn't here. He's so tense all the time, even when he's pretending to be cool, and it stresses me out. Nice to feel free for a change and have a little fun. If he were here, I wouldn't be able to hang out with you guys in your room, and I certainly wouldn't smoke or drink more than a glass of wine. He's always so serious and cautious that it's boring. For example, when we sit in a restaurant, he always sits with his back to the wall and nonstop scans the front and back entrances. He thinks I don't notice, but even when he's supposedly talking to me, he constantly looks at other customers and even pedestrians outside the restaurant. Well, today Oscar gives me all his attention. Oscar is not playing the eternal game of agents and spies. It's not really a game," Betty said sternly. "It's not just that Dora is used to behaving this way. There is a danger that someone might be following him. I know, but he's not here now. He left, and I was left alone. So now I have a few days to really relax. This is my first chance in 2 years to relax a little, and I'm going to make the most of it. Just be careful, okay, certainly." Later that evening, Sal came into Betty's room again. She could hear muffled voices coming from the beach. She wasn't surprised to find Oscar and Ben sitting next to the coffee table, holding drinking cups and smoking weed. When they saw her, their jaws dropped. She wore a short black dress with straps that didn't leave much to the imagination. The 2 stoned men were literally drooling. Sal could hear a bunch of sounds coming from the bathroom. Betty and Lisa were preening there. Oscar offered Sal a drink and a joint. When Betty and Lisa finally emerged, Oscar and Ben exchanged knowing glances. They felt like the happiest people on the island. There was a full moon that night. The beach festivities hardly needed any extra lighting. By 10 p.m., many of the revelers could barely stand. Open bars made everyone too drunk. Betty's company felt much the same. In addition to being drunk, they were slightly overheated. Oscar wouldn't leave Sal's side, and Betty didn't like how Sal let him hug her here and there. Ben desperately tried to make some moves regarding Betty and Lisa, but he was constantly stopped. There was nothing personal about it. They did the same to every man who stumbled and took his shot. No matter how drunk they were, both Betty and Lisa knew that dating a co-worker was a bad idea. As midnight approached, the DJ started playing melodic techno, and the gentle sensual beat really heated things up on the sandy dance floor. Oscar and Sal slowly walked away from the rest of the group to the edge of the crowd. When they thought they were anonymous enough, they moved closer, and she wrapped her arms around his neck. He responded by wrapping his arms around her waist and placing his hands on the small of her back. In addition to the drinking, smoking, and sensual dancing, there was another factor that made this evening deadly for Sal. Estrogen levels in the body were at a monthly peak. She was ovulating, and so she was very excited. At some point, Sal stopped caring about Dora, Betty, Lisa, or anyone else. All she was fixated on was releasing the pent-up sexual tension that had been building up inside her throughout the day and had reached a truly insane level. When Oscar pressed his pelvis against her, she shuddered so hard that she was afraid she would reach her peak right there on the beach. She turned and pressed her back against him, allowing him to wrap his arms around her hips. He buried his nose in the back of her head, and she felt his arousal. At some point, she just couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed his hand and pulled him along to the shore. When she thought they were far enough from the party, and especially from Betty's prying eyes, she pounced on him with a wet and passionate kiss. We won't go all the way, she thought. We will please each other just once and call it a day. Follow me, she whispered in Oscar's ear. She quickly walked towards the path leading to the stairs, and he followed her. She ran up the stairs without looking up, fooling herself into thinking that if she couldn't see the passers-by, they wouldn't see her either. After she and Oscar reached her room, breathless with both excitement and excitement, she had to hand him a magnetic card for the door. Her hands were too shaking to do it herself. Oscar did just fine. Both he and she knew what awaited them there. As soon as the door closed behind them, they began to devour each other. They kissed passionately for some time. The admiration she saw in his eyes pleased her vanity. She dropped all pretense. They had sex, then had sex again, then again some more. They tried every possible position, and she stopped counting how many times she reached the peak of pleasure. The mixture of drinking, smoking, dancing, and sex eventually took its toll. Sal simply collapsed from exhaustion on her stomach on the mattress and began to fall asleep. The next morning, Sal woke up with a terrible hangover, and Oscar was nowhere to be seen. At first, everything was in a fog. She didn't understand where she was. The first coherent thought that came into her head like a poisonous arrow piercing her temples was, "My marriage is over." This terrible thought soon turned into panic. The guilt and shame were more than she could handle. "What have I done?" She wanted to scream but couldn't. She pulled her hair, but she didn't have the strength. She ran to the bathroom to throw up, but nothing came out. She was so thirsty that she drank rusty water straight from the sink faucet. She then returned to her bed and collapsed. Wrapping herself in sheets, she cried bitterly. After a while, a gloomy thought came into her head, and she ran out onto the balcony. "Ha, slope," she thought. "It's a fucking slope. I can't even kill myself." Desperate and broken, she returned to bed and lay there for several hours without moving. In all the possible scenarios she played out in her head, Dor would eventually find out what happened. The only option was to confess everything, but he probably wouldn't forgive her. Even if he forgives, their relationship will never be the same. Dorian won't trust her anymore, and rightfully so. She didn't trust herself. She honestly asked herself whether she could forgive Dor's betrayal under similar circumstances, and the answer was no. At breakfast, Oscar and Ben learned that they were no longer welcome at the girls' table. They were very disappointed, but did not make a scene. That same day, Betty and Lisa rented a car and drove to the other side of the island to see a landmark called Pink Beach. They discussed whether to invite Sal, but decided not to. She didn't show up for breakfast and lunch, so they assumed she needed time alone. On the way there, they picked up two young Italian fellow travelers. Pink Beach was in a secluded area, about a half-hour's walk from the nearest parking lot. The effort was worth it. The pink sand was not only pleasant to look at, but also incredibly soft. On the way back, they stopped at a vegan restaurant and ordered takeout for Sal. They also managed to get her a couple of pills for the morning. At first, Sal wouldn't open the door for them, but after Lisa nearly broke down the door, Sal relented and let them in. She looked terrible. Disheveled hair, a swollen red face that spoke of many tears, and a stale smell that suggested that she had not taken a shower since the day before. Betty and Lisa pulled their friend into a long group hug.